Thank you for your interest in my book, Rationality, What It Is, Why It Seems Scarce, Why It Matters. I wrote the book to resolve a paradox that I think should be of interest to readers in any country, including, of course, China. And that is, how can we account for the paradox of rationality? Why is it that our species, human beings, can achieve spectacular feats of rationality? We have sent a man to the moon. We have invented smartphones and vaccines. We have reduced the toll of death from disease, from war, from poverty. We have reduced illiteracy. We have reduced many of the terrible scourges and problems that were part of the human condition for millennia. At the same time, there seems to be a lot of irrationality in the world today. Many people think that the COVID-19 pandemic was a plot by Bill Gates to implant microchips in our bodies, or that it was caused by 5G cellular wireless transmission lines. People believe in extrasensory perception and crazy quack medical cures. People believe in ghosts and spirits, many things that our best science have shown to be irrational. So how do we resolve this paradox? Is Homo sapiens a rational species or an irrational species? That was a major goal in writing Rationality. I'm sure it is a question that has occurred to many potential readers of this book. I reject the idea that humans are simply irrational. That can't explain for our great accomplishments in science and technology and public health and world peace. And it's not true of humans as they live their lives. We have to be rational just to get to work on time, to get our children clothed and fed and off to school on time, to pay our taxes, to keep a job. So it can't be that humans are just irrational. And even if you look at people living in more technologically primitive societies, such as the Bushmen or San people of the Kalahari Desert in southern Africa, as I start out my book explaining, they, even when people are hunter-gatherers and have to catch their own food, they use great feats of ingenuity in tracking animals from their footprints, from other clues that they leave behind. So what I try to do in Rationality, first of all, is just to explain what rationality is. I define it as the use of knowledge to attain goals. That raises the question of how we can use knowledge to attain goals. And I explain 7 of the major tools of rational thinking that our best mathematicians and logicians and philosophers have developed over the centuries. Tools of reasoning that I think every educated person should know how to use. Logic, probability, a kind of thinking that is known as Bayesian reasoning, that is, using the famous mathematical theorem of the Reverend Thomas Bayes on how we should assess evidence in terms of the degree of belief in a hypothesis. So if someone has a symptom, what is the chance that they have the disease? Bayes' theorem is the means of coming to that conclusion. How do we, that is, adjust the degree of credence that we assign a hypothesis depending on the strength of evidence? That's a third cognitive tool or instrument of rationality that I think everyone should understand. The statistical decision theory, since we are always uncertain, how do we make a decision on the basis of uncertain evidence? How do we make rational choices? The theory of games, this has nothing to do with video games, but it's simply how to make a rational choice when the outcome depends on the choices made by other rational agents. How do we deal with climate change, for example, if the actions from one individual, such as myself, aren't going to save the planet. It only makes sense for me to conserve if everyone else conserves. It only makes sense for one nation to use clean energy if all the other nations use clean energy. How do we solve that dilemma? Finally, the theory of correlation and causation. How do we distinguish between something that is merely a correlate of a cause? For example, does drinking coffee increase the chance of a heart attack? Well, probably not. It's just that people who drink a lot of coffee also tend to exercise less, and exercising less is what causes heart attacks. So those are sometimes called normative models. That is, these are guidelines as to how we should or ought to think if we are to be rational. Now, as a psychologist, I am interested in how people actually do reason. And these are sometimes called descriptive or psychological models. And another part of the book explains how ordinary human beings, like you and me, often do not follow the rules of rationality. And there have been many important discoveries by psychologists on how people are, unless they think very carefully, unless they have the right education, they don't follow these tools of reasoning, and there are many biases and fallacies and errors that the human mind is in danger of making. But I think these are both important and fascinating bodies of knowledge, but I know that's not why people are interested in my book, Rationality. They want to know, why is there so much craziness around the world? Why do people believe in conspiracy theories and quack medical cures and paranormal phenomena like ESP? And a lot of the book tries to explain that. As a psychologist, I think there are a number of reasons why there is this big gap between the rationality that we are capable of and the irrationality that we see all around us. And one of them is that we attain great accomplishments of rationality through the right institutions. That is, we belong to organizations that have rules that make us collectively more rational than any one of us can be individually. Because even though people make a lot of errors in their own thinking, for example, we always think that we're right about everything. People overestimate their own rationality. They overestimate their own wisdom. They overestimate their own competence. This is true of everyday people in the streets. However, we are much better at spotting the fallacies in someone else's thinking, even though we are often blind to the fallacies in our own thinking. So when you put people together in groups, when they work by rules that are designed to attain the truth, then collectively we can often attain greater feats of rationality. What do I mean by institutions? Well, the foremost and most famous is science. In science, you have to test your ideas against empirical evidence. Not just if you're a physicist or a chemist or a biologist, but even if you are a social scientist, a sociologist, a psychologist. If I have a theory of what makes crime go up or down, or what causes war or peace, I have to test it against evidence. It can't be true just because I say it's true. And in science, we have the tradition of peer review. That is, a scientist, no matter how famous, cannot publish a study in a journal just because he's a big shot, fancy schmancy scientist with a Nobel Prize. He still has to send his article out for other scientists to review, and only if other scientists say that it is scientifically sound can it be published. And we have in science freedom of speech, freedom of thought, freedom of inquiry. People are allowed to challenge a dogma, challenge a theory, and if they are right, they can make their argument. If they're wrong, other people point out their argument. So science is an institution that makes us more rational as a community than any individual scientist is. Now, a third example is the court system. When someone is accused of a crime, there is a lawyer that tries to argue that they are guilty, but there's also a lawyer that tries to argue that they are innocent, and then there is a jury that listens to the arguments and tries to come to a decision as to whether the defendant is guilty or not. The journalism and the press, you have the ability to investigate crimes and violence and public policy and laws, but journalists can't just publish anything they want. They have editors, and the editors force them to check their facts, not to just publish anything. One person writes a story, another person checks to see whether it is true or false. Another example of an institution where people working together can spot each other's errors, notice each other's biases, and try to correct them as a group. I argue that these institutions help solve the paradox of how we can be both so irrational as individuals and so rational sometimes as a species. Now, why is this relevant today? Well, it's relevant because we are facing new problems that will require a lot of rationality to solve, such as the COVID-19 pandemic. How do we get people to do the things that will reduce the transmission of the disease, get vaccinated or wear masks? How do we develop better vaccines, better policies, so that people don't get killed by COVID, but that they still are able to lead lives? Another problem that we all face is climate change. How do we enjoy all of the benefits of abundant energy without poisoning the atmosphere, increasing temperatures and hurricanes and extreme weather that might make us all worse off? And in particular, how do we solve the problem when one person, one country can't solve it by themselves? It depends on the whole world, on the whole society cooperating to reduce carbon emissions while still enjoying prosperity. And yet another problem is war. War is undeniably irrational and stupid. People get killed, people get injured. Buildings and bridges and factories and hospitals and schools get destroyed for no reason. How do we resolve our disagreements without doing the massively irrational thing of declaring wars? That is a problem that the world has not solved completely, because we still have wars, but we've gotten much better. I have shown in my other books that the rate of death in war, the number of wars, has gone down over the course of history. That is a problem that our species has managed to solve. And there are others. I'm sure that you can think of great world problems, great personal problems. They can seem depressing, they can seem terrifying, but if we look at history, we see that our species has been able to solve many problems. We live longer, we are less likely to die of starvation, we're less likely to be killed in war, and that's because we have applied our rationality. That's why rationality is a crucially important topic. I have done my best to explain what rationality is, why it seems scarce, why it matters. I hope that you learn and enjoy and profit from reading my book, Rationality.